Welcome to 1850 Main Street, a place where friends get together and talk about their country and hope for a brighter future. Today, Rob Walgate and Alan C. Duncan from the Public Square are joined by David Zanotti, the CEO of the American Policy Roundtable.
When a disaster strikes and all other forms of communication are down, what's the one way to get vital information to the people who need it?
When it comes to policy positions, I don't think there's many that I'm indifferent on. I always feel like, well, I have an opinion one way or another.
You don't say.
I know that comes as a surprise to you, Alan. But we had a conversation a few weeks ago, and it was about legislation that's discussed regarding mandatory AM radios in cars. And I must say, at the time, I was a bit indifferent about it. I thought, well, the market will take care of it, and I'm not really worried about it. Should we be telling people? And then with Hurricane Helene and the stories I've heard out of North Carolina and Georgia and South Carolina and Florida, and the interview, what pushed me, I think, over the edge was the interview I heard on WTAM radio with afternoon host Bloom Daddy interviewing an iHeart host from Asheville, North Carolina, the morning host there. And he was talking about the only method of communication they had was AM radio. And he was talking about old school ham radio. He was talking about the whole thing, and I'm listening, and it was riveting. I texted the host afterwards that I know, Bloom Daddy. I said, I know you guys weren't going for great radio with those stories. I mean, I know that wasn't the goal of the day, being great radio. I said, but that's some of the most intense radio I've ever listened to in my life, listening to him talk about being trapped at a radio station, listening to trees down everywhere, listening to not knowing where his family was. And the only way they had to communicate, the only way they could get info out was AM radios. And I thought, well, I just moved my position. I probably could be moved to the mandatory requirement to have them in homes as well, only because that was the only way they're forced to communicate. And at the time of this recording, there's, solar flares that have been popping up as of late as well that are going to impact, it sounds like, some communication capabilities, but not AM radio. So there's my move on policy position and what it took.
Wow. So you are open to changing your mind. Listen to that. That's pretty cool. So in terms of mandatory radios for the home, so this would be something kind of like a fire extinguisher or, other things that you need in your house. I would recommend a smoke detector, carbon monoxide detector, that level of safety protection just in case kind of a thing?
Yeah, I think it's, you want to have it. I know my home, we now know where the AM radio is because of, obviously we have in cars, but you can run out of gas, you can run out of fuel, you're going to need to make sure you have batteries for the one. But yeah, it's needed, especially with what we're seeing around the southeast of the United States in the past week.
Yeah, well, we had just mild power outages in Northeast Ohio several weeks back. We talked about them on 1850. Nothing like what they're dealing with down south right now. But 5 days with no power is 5 days with no power for people. And AM radio was what I used. AM, FM as well. But yeah, used a lot of radio.
Well, for the old people in the room, let's say that's a very gracious way for me to have an opportunity to say, told you so.
You did. We had the discussion. What was it? 3 weeks ago, we had the discussion on this at the boardroom.
And that's the whole idea, is that bandwidth was dedicated and established for exactly that purpose. It's free. It's supposed to be always available. And remember, when we talk about radio, we're talking about the people's airwaves. Who owns the airwaves? Well, technically in the United States, the people of the nation do. It's the people's radio. And it's, in essence, it's the people's airwaves. It's the same thing with federal lands. Policymakers talk about seizing federal lands. Well, wait a second. The people own the federal lands. So if you're going to utilize federal lands to do something, you've got to go through the process of the people's form of jurisdiction, and that's the Congress. So these assets are owned by all of us. We forget that sometimes, and that's why there's regulatory realities around radio and licensing and controls over how much bandwidth can be used and what It's daytime radio and nighttime radio and all stuff that we take for granted. And, we talk about on-demand. I was laughing the other day thinking about on-demand music in my car. And I flashed back to 1973 and my Volkswagen Beetle, which had an expensive cassette player I bought from a sound company in New York and had them ship it to Ohio so I could install this cassette player under the dash of my car and put speakers in the back windows of my Beetle so I could have my own on-demand music. Now, it's a lot more sophisticated, a lot more laborious than the idea of popping my phone in and syncing it to it. But people have been doing on-demand forever in their cars and for a long, long time. But the idea of moving AM radio out of the picture, that's a really bad idea. Let's talk about North Carolina. I was on the phone today with some dear friends. We have a lot of dear friends in North Carolina, particularly in Western North Carolina and up in the mountains. And the devastation, if you've not ever been there, it's hard to imagine. But if you've been, we were just there a few months ago. And you talk about a town like Asheville, it's such an up and coming town. And you talk about the Biltmore, and you talk about all the beauty and the resorts, and it's an amazingly beautiful part of America. But 3 feet of water over a period of a few days, and it's basically all being through those mountains. It's just washing everything away. It washed everything away.
And that's what the story that I was listening to was, the fact of how, the gentleman was talking about how in that part of North Carolina, they have one of the few rivers that run north. And the reason is it's coming off the mountain, I guess. And just the amount of water that was come rushing. And we've all seen the videos, and they've just been horrific. And you can't imagine that happening. So did
you see the pictures of Chimney Rock, North Carolina?
Yeah.
The town's gone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gone. It got washed in. So this is hard to imagine. The other thing is really hard to imagine is the idea that we're talking about the results of a hurricane hitting in the mountains of North Carolina.
Yeah, just the massive amounts of water that were.
It doesn't connect, right? You think hurricane, you think sea level, think New Orleans, right?
Yeah, you do. But what's interesting about that, with all the water, it was just a few years ago where they were concerned about not having enough water and rain. Primarily, they attributed to the lack of hurricanes throughout the Midwest, and it was impacting the Mississippi River and the ability for barges to navigate the river because of the narrowing. So, I mean, it's just, man, when it all comes at once like that, the devastation. And the stories of the people that are stranded and the people trying to help and the government involvement, it's just been, it's sad. It's heartbreaking is what it is.
A little more behind the scenes, this area, it's quite a large area. From what we can tell from this morning's reports, it's about a 4-mile drive, a 4-hour drive. That's the width of the damage. You'd be driving for 4 hours and still dealing with the hurricane damage, which is incredible to think about. And it actually hit the offices of Samaritan's Purse. All right, so here's a relief agency that just got wailed on by a hurricane and got flooded out of their facilities.
And that's what they do, is travel the world helping people who get wailed on.
And now they're the ones that are, and so in typical fashion, Samaritan's Purse's staff, they're not bailing out their basement. All right, they're out in the fields up in the mountains trying to take care of people who are in worse situations than they're in. It's so bad right now that, just as the report that we got just within hours, there are teams that have been moved in. Maybe you heard this, but there are teams that have been moved in large tractor trailer rigs have come in, bringing pack mules into the towns to be able to go find people, because there's no way to get up there, go looking for people. We're back to like 1800s. We got to have mules go up those hills.
The roads have been washed out.
It's remarkable, and there's certainly a lot of reason to be praying, and this is where relief agencies really matter. And we're going to put a plug in for Samaritan's Purse, because now not only are they the channel of being of our dollars going out, but now they're in need too. And God protect all those people and help them. Now, one thing that I was told today from an insider, he said, "Look, they're saying there's 1,000 people missing up there." He said, "Now look, we know a lot of these folk. He said, they know how to live on not a whole little. And we're not guessing. We're not thinking they're dead. They're just taking care of themselves up in the hills. We're going to go find them. He said, so listen, we don't want to overreact, but still the fact that you can't connect.
You can't connect it. I mean, and it is, as you mentioned, a large area. I believe it's 25 counties.
Thanks for stopping by at 1850 Main Street. We're glad you're here. Do you want to learn more about what is really going on behind the scenes in public policy? Tune in to the Public Square on over 200 radio stations coast to coast. Or download the free Public Square mobile app from your app store. Just look for the lamppost. Find out what America is really talking about at thepublicsquare.com.
Well, we talk about needing old tech, radio, pack mules, but Elon Musk is stepping in as well to help with some of the newest tech with Starlink as well. So it's kind of all hands on deck. We need the oldest of the old, and we need the newest of the new when we can get it. So it seems like everybody's trying to help out in some way.
Back in 2010, here in Nashville, we had that historic, what they call now a 1,000-year flood. And what happened was very, very similar situation. A front moved over Middle Tennessee, and it didn't leave. It didn't leave for 3 days. It rained for 3 solid days. And then we were out of town for those 3 days. So when we flew back in and looked down, everything that used to be green was brown. Now you can imagine it's like somebody had a coloring book and they changed the color and everything was now brown. By the time we got on the land and began to look and to get involved in different relief efforts, it was incredible. People have no idea. And over again, people said you'd be better to get burned out than flooded out any day of the year, because when you're burned out, it's gone. Now it's just as gone when you're flooded out, but you got to cart it out, and it's awful. And the smell, and then the heat comes, and then the mold, and it is awful. But what we saw, and I'm certain the same thing's happening in North Carolina right now. What we saw was people rise up. The world stops. I mean, this is it. This is a once-in-a-lifetime situation that you're in. Yeah. Everything stops. It doesn't matter where you're going to school, if your term paper's due. It doesn't matter what's happening at the bank. Nothing matters. What matters is, how do I help the next person I can help? And I saw volunteers. We actually saw traffic jams and state patrol and city police having to come out to direct volunteers, because the traffic of people flooding in to help was such that they had traffic jams of people coming out. That made me cry. I stood there in the street corner and I had tears in my eyes thinking, this is what America truly is in its heart of hearts. When disaster strikes, you have a traffic jam, people trying to get there to help. And I'm sure a lot of that's going on in North Carolina, so we appreciate everyone who's thinking about that and trying to help as well. Yeah, the pack mules thing, though, that's what really got me.
Well, you think about long car rides with Bub Walgate growing up as you go down I-77 and you see some of those things as you go through the mountains. And he always says, man, can you imagine trailblazing these hundreds of years ago and then afterwards building the roads that go up those places? And in a lot of those towns, that's exactly what they're going to have to do to get back to the top of the mountain. They're going to have to rebuild the roads. I mean, you've seen the washouts. You've seen how whole chunks just fell because of, landslide type things where homes were just wiped out and taken away. It's tragic.
We were just there, more toward the end of the summer. But about a month ago, before the hurricane hit, up in Cashiers, one of the major roads you get up to Cashiers and Highlands up a mountain, up two different sides. You can come up one side, down the other. One of the major roads had already washed out. And we're talking about washing out. We're talking about a road. You get two roads up, or down. You have two roads, a way to get in or out, and one of them's gone. And the recovery time is 6 to 9 months. It's not like a 6-day inconvenience for nighttime construction. There's just no more road. And to be honest with you, there aren't a lot of roads to start with. It's pretty thorny getting around there. So this is quite a challenge. Okay, so you're now on our side on AM radio, right?
I'm there. I think everyone should have it. Yeah, I'm fine with it being implemented, and it's a life-saving tool and it's a necessity. I think it's a public safety method as well for you to hear communications about what's happening, especially if power is lost. And let's face it, we live in a hostile world. And we know people are attacking all over the world. And if someone wanted to come at us, what are they going to do?
Well, you know who else is a big fan of radio is George Soros. Yeah. George Soros just spent some money to buy Odyssey. That might be a whole nother show. I started to throw it in at the end here, but that there's clearly an investment from the left's biggest pocketbook into radio. So Dave, this is another opportunity for you to say, I told you so, because you've been hammering the importance of radio, as I hammer the importance of YouTube and Rumble and X. You say, well, okay, fine, but we cannot abandon terrestrial radio. And so this is why we are on, 150 or so, probably more than that now at this point, across
238 right now.
Yeah,
238 across, with the public square and all of its various formats.
And what's interesting about what we're doing is, I think it's a point of demarcation, because you talked about the policy question, Rob. This isn't just like a board game where we get together and have coffee and chat, or we get together on the public square and pontificate. This is a different model. What's happening coming to people through the networks of the American Policy Roundtable and the media products of the American Policy Roundtable is more like a behind-the-scenes pass that people get in to be able to come and find out what's going on behind the scenes in public policy, because we do the work of public policy. Now, what does that mean? Well, doing the work of public policy has lots and lots of features, and it would take way too long to describe it in any one kind of a program and format. But usually you're talking about legislation, litigation, and elections. Those are the three realms of where these things are played out. Now, there's a fourth one, and that's the whole question of worldview or principles. So we've assembled as an organization based upon principles and advocating a worldview, a perspective of how to look at America. But we just don't talk about that. We're just not commentators. That is one thing we are not, is commentators, because we do the work of public policy. When it comes to elections, we build an election information site. We populate that election information site with thousands of candidates in all 50 states, and then we publish that online for free so that people can come and have access and participate in the voting process. That's doing the work. That's just not talking about voter turnout. And whether that the question is on AM radio policy, we'll be in that fight. Or the question about the questions of life we've been talking about. We've been in that fight for 45 years. And sometimes that means you're on the ground. Sometimes that means you're collecting petitions. I mean, our team has been spit upon in public. We've been people punched in the nose for circulating petitions. We've been in legal suits in regards to suing governors and in regards to bad laws and suing industries and constitutional matters. We've been the whole way to the Supreme Court on advocating for legislation on school choice. So we do the work, and we keep doing the work, and we're committing to doing the work. So what we're trying to do is to help people get behind the scenes. So there is a uniqueness to what we do, because we have the opportunity now with the technology to tell the stories. So you've got kind of a behind the scenes pass here, and that's what all of this is about.
The conversations are just getting started. To get connected, check out 1850mainstreet.com. We don't data mine anyone or sell your information. Subscribe today so you don't miss a single conversation. We'll see you next time here at 1850 Main Street.